Backyard Bullion here, and a warm welcome to part 2 of the making of a solid silver chess set. It's been a while since part 1, and that's just simply because of the winter break, the Christmas break, slightly delaying production of the wonderful boards. And if you want to find out a little bit more about the boards, they are not going to be featured in today's video. There was actually a video on Friday last week which showcased one of the boards that Dad made. But in today's video, we're going to be focusing now on the production of the pieces once again. And in the first part, we looked at the pouring of them. The second part is all of the afterwork that goes into these pieces. There's an awful lot to get through, so without further ado, let's jump in and see how we finish up these chess pieces. So the next part is to sand down the bases. Now, a lot of the bases are fairly good at the moment and they don't have too much of a wibble wobble, but there are some that do, and I like to have as good a piece as possible. So to that end, we sand down all of the bases. Now, traditionally, I've always done all of my sanding by hand, and I'd have essentially a piece of sandpaper like this, and I'd just go back and forward. It takes a very long time, especially when the sort of deep parts of the piece to actually sand down. So we have invested in a belt sander. Big thanks to Dad for helping me choose a decent priced one that actually works really well. And essentially we are here just to sand down the pieces to as flat as they can be. It doesn't have to take a great deal of silver off, but we do take a little bit off, and that's why we've got this contraption at the other end here, because a lot of the silver will fly that way. Some of it will also come here on the table. That's why we've got the plastic tablecloth on as well. So it's a pretty lengthy and loud process. This machine, as you can hear, it's pretty noisy. So I'm going to show you it with the sound reduced quite a lot for this first piece, and then we can just crack on and do all the rest of the 31 other pieces. It takes a very long time to do it, but here we go. So we can see a little way into the first piece what that short amount of time has done to it. So it's starting to take off all of the layers which are not obviously flat. There's this little dimple in the middle, which we're going to hopefully sand down in its entirety and get it nice and flat and even across the whole surface. Okay, so here we go, and this is also now, by the way, just about as hot as I can hold with my bare hands without it being too hot to hold. It really does get some incredible sort of friction heat passing into the pieces. Come on, camera, I know it's a bad day with the light. There we go, so we can see it's all nice and flat now, and will certainly stand a lot better than it did before. Now, of course, that's not the kind of finish, again, if we can get it to focus, that's not the kind of finish that we want on our pieces. So the next step is to take some really very fine grade sandpaper and actually sand it down to a pretty close to mirror finish. We won't completely finish them because they've got to go up to the assay office, so they'll inevitably get a little bit you know, dinged and bruised and stuff en route, so we'll just do that at the other end. But ultimately that is all we have to do for that one piece, maybe a little bit more just to even it out across here, but times 31 for the rest of the pieces, and then a bit of hand sanding. So I have finished all 32 pieces with the belt sander. Took a fair old while, and we took off an awful lot of silver in the form of this dust that appears on the table and in my rudimentary catching tray at the back there. There's also always a bunch in this kind of cover guard area. So I'm going to get all of that out and we'll just see quite how much we've sanded off. The next step though is some hand sanding on these 32 pieces to smooth them out even more and get them ready for stamping such that we can then send them to the Edinburgh assay office. Okay, so collected all of the silver shavings, and there's about 25 grams in here, but we're not done yet because whilst we have flattened the surfaces really quite well on all of these, they're still quite scratched, and we want to get them smoother and nicer, and the bulk of that work we can do now before we send them up to the assay office for their hallmarking, and then we finish them to a nice mirror finish at the other end. So this bit is done by hand. You could theoretically do it with another sander, belt sander, but I have no space in my house. Like we work in a small house, kitchen, this is my kitchen table. There's just not enough room to have many, many machines. Maybe one day when I have my own forge. So we do this next step by hand, and I've got here a variance of different grades of sandpaper ranging from 240 grit all the way up to 1,000. I do then have another packet which is going from 2,000 all the way up to 7,000. We'll use that second packet once we've basically got them all hallmarked. There's no point in making them all nice and shiny now, putting them in a box and they all get dinged, bruised, whatever, en route. So basically it's just a case of hand sanding these pieces down. Now from experience, if we start with a 600, that'll probably be enough to get the majority of these deep scratches out. And yeah, and then I've basically got to rinse and repeat for 32 pieces. So it's going to take a good old while to get all of these done. And of course, not going to show you every single piece being done, but just an example of what we do. So you can see already that this piece is starting to smooth out quite nicely, and it is just a case of making sure that you've got a nice hard flat surface underneath, and then just a little bit of elbow grease to get basically just the top layers off it. Again we're sanding off bits of silver here, and some of the colour that you can see going onto this sandpaper will actually be the silver itself. So now this particular one, it's quite deep scratches, so let's go actually down a grade as well. Let's use, what have we got? We've got 600 is what we're using now. Let's go for the 240, if I can find it. There we go. So you can see the 240 is a lot coarser. The higher the number, the finer it is. Let's just use that for now. The one that was on the sanding belt was 80 grit, so you can see there's a very distinct difference. Yeah, so that's working nicely. We're getting the deep scratches out of that now, and with a little bit more time and energy, it should be fairly smooth and flat, such that we can go back up to the higher grits of sandpaper again. Or I say the higher grits, the higher numbers, the lower grits. So you can see it's quite a timely process. It takes a while to get each piece to the standard that I want. And I've got to do this 32 times, remember. So on average, it takes a good few hours to do all of these pieces. And I always get asked, why don't you do it by machine? Why don't you just get another machine? As I said, I don't have room for it. There's also something very cathartic about working with your hands, about putting the time and energy into what you do and making it perfect. You do get a lot more control using hands. Like the belt sander is great for taking off just the chunky top layers and really getting an even surface. But really, for me, it's all about making it as good as it can be, because ultimately these are not cheap pieces of silver. They are meant to be as good as they can be, and we want to make sure of that. So that's why I do a lot of this process by hand. Just the vast majority of the top layers by machine, but the rest of it, as you can see, is done by hand. So that is pretty much there in terms of those deep scratches. Just a couple more. Yeah, that's pretty much there. So now we can go back up. Let's go up to 1,000 grit, and hopefully that should then show you guys the real difference in how it looks. So I'm going around in sort of angles here as well, just to kind of, get every single little bit of the base as smooth as possible. Now, as I said, I'm not going to get it up to a mirror finish right now. We'll come back to that, or come back to this stage after we've sent it to Edinburgh. But for right now, that's good enough for me. Like that's good enough work that if there is another little ding or dent in there, that's fine. I'll just, sand it out when we get it back, but don't usually get too many, if at all. So that's a very nice difference. And in fact, if we show you almost a before and after, you can kind of see the huge kind of scratch difference is gone. And when you build that up through the rest of the sandpapers, it will be very, very shiny and finished. So that's the process. One piece, 5 minutes on just that side of it, maybe a little bit longer for some of the other pieces. We can also save these little bits of silver. So I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but over 32 pieces, it's about 6 or 7 grams that we're going to shave off. Some of it, of course, will be stuck on the sandpaper. Ultimately, that's kind of wasted silver, sadly, at the moment. A lot of jewelers and things, interestingly enough, would always keep these and have them melted down one day, and the silver would, of course, be reclaimed, but that's not really possible for us. I've got all of my old pieces of sandpaper, but maybe one day when I've got my own forge, we can do that. So yeah, that is the process of sanding. Next up is going to be stamping. Now, normally if you're stamping a nice flat bar, it's got a flat surface to put on your stamping block, and then you've got perfect leverage and purchase to stamp whatever you want on it. However, that is not very possible or practical with a 3D chess piece. Now, you could clamp this down, but the 999 malleability, if that's a word, of the silver would probably mean it's going to damage or bend or warp. So that's not really very possible. So we're going to stamp on the side profile of the base. It's the best place I've found to stamp. It's got a big bulk of silver underneath it to absorb the hammer blow. On some of the bigger pieces, the longer pieces, more specifically the kings and queens, you can actually warp it slightly. It's not the end of the world if that happens. You can bend it back, but it just shows how malleable this 999 fine silver can be. So we're going to stamp a few pieces right now and show you the process. Stamping silver, by the way, is always a learned skill. If you're a fledgling silver pourer and stamper out there, it's a learned skill, and it might go wrong for you at the start, but it's just about care and attention and just practicing as much as possible. But anyway, we'll talk more on that in a moment. Fancy scales, that's also what I've got out here on the table to share with you. So in the United Kingdom, if you sell anything by weights and measures, including hand-poured silver, you need to have some trading standard approved weighing scales. It's an extra expense, and quite an expense, that doesn't even measure in ounces troy. It's very, very annoying. But it's a logical one, of course. If you're selling something by weights and measures, you want to make sure that the customer gets exactly what you say they are getting in terms of weight. So needs must, and they are, as I said, very expensive. So expensive that they don't weigh in ounces troy, which is always very annoying because it means I have to do a very quick calculation. So we've got 121.9 grams, and I'm going to divide by 31.105, which is slightly above a value of ounces troy. But that means that the result that I get is under what this actually weighs, so that I'm not stamping something more than it actually weighs. The last thing you would want is to stamp something 1 ounce and it go to a customer and actually be 0.99 of an ounce. That's not good, but if it's under, that's okay. So this calculation comes out at 3.918 ounces troy. I always go to 2 decimal places. Again, that's a way that I can control always stamping so that it is under the actual physical weight of the item. So what did I say? 3.91 ounces troy is what we're going to be doing on this particular piece. Now, we are also going to be putting some consideration into the hallmark, and that has to go as well on the piece where the Edinburgh Assay Office are going to stamp. So I've got all the right ones I need lined up there. And with the other pieces that I've done, we've also put on our leaf, which is our kind of signature piece. It's what we've always used. And what we do is we put the leaf on, so we've got the seam here for these pieces, and we're going to put the leaf on the left-hand side of the seam, and then the hallmark will go to the left of that leaf. That's the plan for this. Now, it's a particularly tricky one because they are roly-poly pieces. They do move around quite a bit. So again, it's a skill that you kind of have to have and learn. But basically, once you're there, it's about confidence. It's about just making sure that you're not slipping and that you've got everything in the right place that you want it to. And then, when you're ready, a little bit of a loud bang, so be warned. There we go. Now, I did 2 hammer strikes there because I felt that it was secure enough to go for a second one without it having jumped. Sometimes you'll strike once and the stamp might have jumped slightly. So you can see here, we've got the leaf that's come on really quite well onto that particular piece. Now we're going to do the weight onto the right hand side of that seam, so we're going to go 3.91. Now these are slightly easier because they're smaller stamps and they don't need quite so much sort of pressure going into them, and I can basically just tap them in like that. Yeah, that's come up really nicely. We've got this for the decimal place, and then we've got the 9, always with a 9. Double check that you've not got it the wrong way around, because if you get it the wrong way around, it's a 6. I've done that once or twice, which is very annoying. And stamping something 1/3 of an ounce heavier or lighter than it actually is just not right. So there's 3.91. Next, we're just going to put OZT on there, and then that's pretty much all the stamping. Normally on these, or on any pieces that we do, we do stamp our sort of BYB logo, but of course on this particular piece, there's no room really to do that at all. So we're just going to do 3.91 OZT. Of course, the hallmark will incorporate part of our brand anyway in BYB anyway, so it's not the end of the world, but sometimes it's nice to have the BYB logo on some of our other pieces too. But these are a bit different. So there we go, that is 3.91, if we can get the camera to focus, 3.91 OZT with the leaf, and then the hallmark will go on this side here, which hopefully would all be fine. Now we've managed to do this without bending the bishop, which is a phrase I thought I'd never say here on YouTube. We haven't bent the bishop, which is good. You know, the big culprits of the warping and bending from stamping are the queens and kings. So that looks like a pretty good piece to me, pretty perfect, and ready to go to the next stage, which is going to be the ultrasonic bathing. Now I'm going to stamp all of these before we do that, but the ultrasonic bathing is the last step that we do before we head up to, or we send these up to the assay office. So, okay, the next step is an ultrasonic bath. Now that sounds like a little bit of a weird thing to say about hand poured silver, but we do it because these pieces are going to be going up to the Edinburgh assay office for assay testing and hallmarking. Now an assay test is where they will look at the silver. They will determine what purity it is to a very, very good degree of accuracy. And then, assuming it meets the 999 minimum standard, they will mark it with that mark to tell you, the consumer, that it is what we say it is, 999 fine silver. Now that process is a very accurate one. It has to be, and it has been for centuries. It's a very, very robust procedure to test the silver, and they've got many different methods by which they test things. And it can be ultra sensitive. So one of the precautions that I take is to avoid any potential surface contaminants, and that often actually more comes from the stamping side of things. So these stamps here, they're nothing special, and there's little bits of iron oxide, also known as rust, but iron of course is another metal which is detectable on various bits of machinery that assay officers will use. And of course you don't want anything like that to potentially skew the results or to you know, give false readings of what it is, especially if, for example, they drill into the silver at a point where there's a nice little clump of rust, and then they send it off to the lab and it comes back showing less than 909. That will then put questions in the assay officer's mind about the what's called homogeneity of your submission, and they'll probably not pass it. So we use an ultrasonic bath, and it's really just as simple as putting the pieces in the water. There's nothing very special about this. This is just a regular jewellery cleaner. You can pick them up on Amazon, eBay, wherever, for not very much money, 20, 30, 40 pounds, depending on the size. And basically the science of it is that there are many, many microscopic bubbles which are created, and those will dislodge any basically little bits of detritus that are on the pieces, and it will clean them. And that's the nuts and bolts of it. I usually run them for 300 seconds. And it's that simple. I mean, it's just a little bit of an extra step that we do. It really, you know, gives me peace of mind that I've got everything off in terms of dirt and dust and potential other contaminants on there. And especially like using those bits of sandpaper that I was using before. Some of the grits in those sandpapers can often have other elements and metals in them. So by doing this, it takes away all other potential surface contaminants, and then it's just the silver, just what the metal is meant to be at the assay office. So a nice little extra step that we take to make sure things are good. I'm going to stop that now because that buzzing is infuriating. So that's the last step. Then I package them all up and send them up to the Edinburgh assay office, and then when they're back from assay, we have the last step of blackening one side of the board. So a few weeks later for me, just a few seconds with the magic of video editing for you, I have all of the pieces returned from the Edinburgh assay office with their hallmarks. Here is the hallmark, if we can get it into focus. There we go, the BYB, the 999, the Castle and the V. They are all marks put on by the Edinburgh assay office to say the first mark, BYB, it's made by me. 999, the purity of the silver. The Castle is the Edinburgh's mark, and the V is the date letter for 2020. So that has now been done on all 32 pieces, and the very last step is to make one side black, because of course chess is black versus white. Some people asked, why don't you gold gild one side so it's gold versus silver? Could do, but I choose not to. I don't think gold gilding is the way forward for me. I think often gold gilding doesn't look particularly good. It has to be a really, really well done thing to look good. So liver of sulfur is the way forward for me to create the black pieces. It's a very smelly thing. It smells like rotten eggs, hence me keeping it in this sealed bag. And actually I'm going to head outside to the back garden to do this particular job because it really is quite smelly and I don't really want my house smelling of rotten eggs. And here I am out on my potting bench in my back garden where it all began. Little known fact, I poured my very first pieces of poured silver out on this potting bench, but it makes a perfect location to work with rather smelly liver of sulfur gel. Now it is a gel when it comes out of this little bottle, and the general premise is that you water it down with hot water, which helps fuel the reaction with the silver when you put the pieces in there. Quick little mix to make sure all the gel has dissolved within to the water, and then in the pieces go. And the general idea for the chess pieces is to leave them in for a good long time. We're talking sort of 15-20 minutes within this solution. Normally just a very quick dip in here will actually yield some really nice pretty rainbow results. I'll show you those in a moment, but we want a really dark patina or colouring on the silver. Now a lot of people have often asked, does this process damage the silver? Does it make it any less pure? No, it just simply speeds up the oxidization process that silver would normally go through. You know, you see old silver coins, old coins, things like that, they're all tarnished and black, and that is exactly what is happening here in this pot of liver of sulfur solution. It's just speeding up that process. So after about 5 minutes or so, you can see here the results. We've got some rather nice looking pieces with some really interesting kind of colouring coming out on them. I want this to be as deep and dark a patina as possible, so we are going to leave them in probably for another 10 or so minutes after I turn the camera off. But that's the general idea. You can see the vast change that happens very quickly with them. And once they're all done, we end up with a full set of solid silver chess pieces. And I'm really proud with these sets and how they turn out. It is most certainly a sight to behold to have a solid silver chess set. I've been playing a little bit more chess than I used to recently, inspired not only by my own creation of solid silver chess sets, but also The Queen's Gambit on Netflix. Really good show if you haven't seen it. So that's the overview of the making of our solid silver chess sets. As you can see, it is a lengthy process that we go through to make sure that things are as good as they can be for the customers involved. I just want to say a personal thank you to orders number 2 and 3 who have been waiting since early December for their orders, because it's not easy for Dad to get out and make these chessboards in the dead of winter in his shed, in the cold shed. So, you know, it is one of those things that is very humbling to have the amount of support and patience from customers out there. So a big thank you to you guys for that. If you are watching this video and you're interested in commissioning a solid silver chess set of your own, then please feel free to get in touch and we can look to sort something out. We are taking commissions on these. They're a very unique purchase, and it's of course something that will you know, be a big purchase for people. So we understand that flexibility is of course really important for from our perspective. If you are interested in getting hold of a set, and we'd be more than happy to look to help with any kind of payment plans and things like that over time. So if people want to and are interested in getting a set, please feel free to email me. The links are down in the description below. If you want to see more about the board, as I said at the start of this video, there's a link down in the description to In Focus Friday's episode where we showcase the other board that we've got that Dad has made, and talk a little bit about the process that he goes through for that. But I hope otherwise this has been an enjoyable video for you to see a chess set come together. If it has, you know what to do. Thumbs up on this video. Tell YouTube that you like it. And if you want to see videos like this in the future, then make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you would like to share this around on social media of your own, then please feel free to do so. Otherwise, that's it from me today. Have a fantastic week ahead. As always, please make sure that you like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.